Outrage over the death of Otto Warmbier is intensifying. The 22-year-old American student's death just days after his release from North Korea with severe brain damage, now being called murder by top U.S. lawmakers. This afternoon, the White House responded to questions about whether the U.S. would retaliate against the rogue state.
We have been very forceful in our political and economic pressure that has been applied in North Korea. I think we will continue to apply that.
And President Trump also tweeted a short time ago saying, quote, "While I greatly appreciate the efforts of President Xi and China to help with North Korea, it has not worked out. At least I know China tried." Ebony Cat. First of all, we'll do the tweet in a second, but Spicer's response didn't sound very forceful to me. You?
No, it didn't. Not forceful enough. It is murder, right? It's clearly is murder and should be more forceful, but what are you going to do?
What do you think?
Yeah, of course. It was way too measured. We have to call a thing, you know, whether that's Islamic terror or, in this case, the murder of this innocent young man. So we have to be consistent on that.
All right, let's get right to this. Let's meet today's specialist. He's the CEO and founder of the Guardian Angels. He's the New York State Reform Party chairman, and he's the co-host of the Curtis and Ebony Show on 77 WABC Radio. And he specializes in rocking a red beret better than anyone we know. Curtis Sliwa is here. And he's the associate editor of The Spectator. He's the associate director of the Henry Jackson Society, a UK foreign policy think tank. And he's the author of the new book, The Strange Death of Europe, Immigration, Identity, Islam, which is out today. And he specializes in being an Englishman in New York. Douglas Murray is also here. But I have a few more things to say about this. It's time to wake up, America. The death of Otto Warmbier broke just before we went to air yesterday. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Maybe because I have a son about the same age when poor Otto wandered innocently into North Korea on a travel junket, something my son might do, or maybe because I have a long memory. I remember that obviously staged North Korean press conference where Otto admitted to taking a poster from a hotel for which he was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. Again, a poster from a hotel. Now look at the video. Otto breaking down in fear of the fate he awaited. It doesn't take a UVA degree to see that this was a coerced confession. That young man right there was scared to death, possibly, probably, literally. But I also remember the shameless way the liberal left media treated poor Otto. Despicable hacks at Salon ran this headline. Check it out. "This might be America's biggest idiot frat boy." That has since been deleted, but it got worse. Huffington Post made the incident about race and blamed Otto. They said, quote, "North Korea proves your white male privilege is not universal." So according to the Huffington Post, Otto Warmbier was abducted by North Korean war criminals because he was white, and the whole matter is his own fault. Huffington Post, you owe the Warmbiers an apology. But leave it to failing liberal websites to insert race and white privilege into literally everything. Can we just please stop? Apparently we can't. Check out this tweet by a website that claims to represent millennials. It says, quote, "Watch whiteness work. He wasn't a kid or innocent. You can't go to another country and try to steal from them. Respect their laws." That was Affinity magazine, and they tweeted this after the news broke of Otto's demise, blaming poor Otto for the cruel and unusual punishment. By the way, that is loathsome, Affinity. It's subhuman. But reasonable people on both sides of the political spectrum should see that as horrendous. Nobody deserves the fate of Otto Warmbier. Nobody. And those who think it's cute, funny, or an opportunity to highlight social justice issues, maybe you should spend a few months in a North Korean prison. Let us know how American life and liberty look to you then. Any takers at Affinity, by the way? I doubt it. After severe backlash, Affinity took down that asinine tweet. I'll bring Curtis Sliwa in right away. What is going on with the left that they will insert white privilege into all their debates, all their dialogues?
Well, because they're so used to their mantra. And yet I'm looking at this and I'm saying, hey, Mr. President, how about putting on a travel ban to any American who's crazy enough to go behind the kimchi curtain of North Korea and deal with the evil seed of Kim Jong mentally ill? That's where we need a travel ban. When Otto decided to go with everyone else, you're taking a risk. These are countries where totalitarian dictators kill their own people. Why wouldn't they kill a tourist or a visitor? And we're not prepared to go to war. I hope, Eric, you're not suggesting This is like weapons of mass destruction. This is like Gaddafi in Libya. This is like Bashir Assad. We do not need to start a fight over Aden.
Douglas, I got lit up a little bit yesterday for suggesting that maybe there could be or would be or should be a preemptive, let's not call it a nuclear strike, but certainly a strike to limit North Korea's capability of delivering a warhead to the United States.
Well, that's certainly the red line that has to be held by this country. Look, I mean, North Korea is, against some fairly stiff competition, the worst country in the world. I've been, as a reporter, to many terrible places. I've been to North Korea. It's literally a hell on earth. And there is nothing you could do to cut it off more. It's totally isolated. It has no sense of what the outside world believes or knows about it. The people have been brainwashed. When the regime does fall, it will be, you will need millions of psychiatrists to deal with the people in that country alone. But the absolute red line for this country is you cannot allow it to get deliverable missiles.
Yeah, the problem is, and Kat, when do we know? I mean, there literally could be an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, on a launch site, and we don't know what they have jacked in the tip of that warhead.
Right, and the problem is there really is no good way to deal with North Korea, because of course, we don't want them to allow them to get to that point. But if we do something, Eric, obviously they're gonna retaliate. We can't wipe out everything, especially since the way the terrain is. There's a lot of ways to hide things, and like you said, all those people there'd be a huge vacuum. It'd be like what happened in Libya. It'd be that on steroids in terms of this vacuum of power. Even if we did take him out, people being able to come in and have the same kind of terrorist-type organizations there. So it's a huge, huge mess.
You want to address your radio co-host over there saying that maybe the only way to do this is to do a travel ban?
Oh, well,
that's how we're going to deal with
Let's
Kim
have
Jong-un?
point one before I step on you, Ebony K. Williams.
Go ahead.
It's Red China we need to go after.
Okay,
the
we didn't say
mentor
that.
state.
You
They're
didn't say that.
Medicis.
You-
They're supporters.
You blamed American travelers.
North Korea can't survive a day without the red Chinese yen. And yet there's the president playing footsie with president who's on first, I don't know who's on second, who's on third, down in Mar-a-Lago having
President
chocolate
Xi.
cake.
Are you
Come on.
pleased that you
It's the
started
red
this
Chinese that we need to put pressure
Your
on.
sandwich in front of
All right,
a couple of these
in his
thoughts here.
defense, he did mention China this morning on our show. Listen, Eric, I actually want to address something that I thought was very important and powerful in your monologue. And that is the fact that the way certain, I won't even call them publications, rags, internet rags, responded to the death of this young man shows a real lack of empathy in our country, in our world. It's the same lack of empathy I've seen in the wake of the tragic death of Philando Castile, for whatever you think happened, because people are so attached to their political ideologies, right? And they run in their respective corners, and they get so caught up and in their feelings around it that when innocent people die, there is no room in their hearts and in their emotional capacity for empathy. And I think that's very, very important, because no matter, I wouldn't advise anyone to go to North Korea, obviously, but this young man is dead, and it's unnecessary. It's the result of a
and we
regime.
there are at least three more Americans being held under the same circumstances so far, and a Canadian as well. So, Curtis, before we wait and see who doesn't show up in North Korea anymore, what are the answers? How do we get these people back? Should we talk foreign policy expert? How do you get our other three Americans back?
It's extremely hard because the nature of the regime now with Kim Jong-un is even more unpredictable than it was with his father or his grandfather. I think that, first of all, as we said, regime change is kind of off the table. The only thing you can do, as you said, is to go via the Chinese. The Chinese are the only... They regard the North Koreans as being like a very embarrassing young relative. And they know that they sort of own it and are responsible for it, and they hate it, and yet they need it. And it's only with the Chinese, as you say, that you can do anything.
How do you get the Chinese to understand that any sort of conflict on the Korean Peninsula would be a floodgate of refugees into mainland China?
Well, the Chinese know that, and they also, but the other thing is they don't want South Korean-style capitalism on their border either. So the only way you can do it is to persuade the Chinese that the price for them not bringing Pyongyang into line is worse than the price of bringing them into line. But, I mean, you're dealing with literally the most insane leadership on the planet.
How do we demonstrate that, though, what you just said? Because that's been my question I asked 15 different ways every time this topic comes up. How do we incentivize China to get on board?
We already do it. We attack Iran on a regular basis. But we give the red Chinese a pass. They export fentanyl into our country. It is now the #1 reason that people are dying of opioids in this country because of Red China. We give them a pass on everything. This president has to knock off this business deal mentality with Red China and play hardball.
So, Curtis, Levi,
meaning
are you
what? What do you-
suggesting we attack, like military action against China? Leave North Korea alone,
the same
but
way
attack
we're
China.
putting pressure on the North Koreans with aircraft carriers and battleships and cruisers. Start aiming it towards the Red Chinese coast. Start putting all means of pressure.
Let me get
and
this straight.
fiscal
You
pain.
would rather aim our cannons and our firepower at 1.3 or 1.4 billion people than maybe 40 or 50 million people in North Korea?
Who pulls the strings on the North Koreans? It's the Red Chinese.
Absolutely,
We
but-
are distracted and deflected by that fat guy with the bad haircut, the nut job, who obviously wants to be a cast character of mayhem. He loves doing this
I
and becoming the
disagree.
center
We're
of
not
attention.
distracted, Curtis. What it is our financial interests are a direct
Right.
conflict with our. That's what
There actually are
It's
That's
all
actually what's
about the
going on.
moolah shmoolah,
Of
the
course it is.
money.
Of course it
There
is.
actually are consequences to just sort of threatening and aiming cannons at people all around the world. There really just are.
Oh, but we do it
There
in
really
Syria.
just are.
We do it
We
in North
shouldn't.
Korea.
So may bring Douglas in here. I mentioned yesterday that I believe it's 1980 and 1981, Israel was threatened by the Iranians and their nuclear program, and they covertly went in and said, look, we want your help in the United States. We weren't offering it, and they did it on their own.
Yeah.
They blasted their nuclear
That's right.
capability 20 years into the future.
The Oz-Iraq strike, the Israelis carried out the most successful preemptive strike in military history that I can think of. It stopped a country getting nuclear weaponry. Look, the thing with North Korea, you've got to decide what it is you want. If you want to get the people home, then that's one decision. If you want to stop them ever being a nuclear power, that's another decision. If you want to do regime change, that's another. But to my mind, you have to decide which of these is most important.
Let me ask you this, Kat. Do the North Koreans have the right, let's call it this, do they have the right to develop their nuclear program knowing what we know about their leader?
Obviously not. I don't think anybody would say that that's a good idea. Obviously
I didn't
not.
say good idea, bad idea. Do they have the right to do it?
No, because it's a murderous regime. We don't want that. Nobody wants that.
So if
These
they
are not
don't
good
have the
people.
right to
breach
do
of
it, isn't it
international
our
law.
turn or our time or to have a coalition go in? Look,
And
for
do what,
65 years we've tried to deal with this
Right.
with this North Korean regime, and 5 presidents haven't been able to. Maybe it is time to do it. Take the page from the
Like I said,
Israelis.
and they're the only country in the world that actually runs concentration camps at
Yeah,
the moment.
exactly.
The only country.
But yet we still continue to tab on this notion of doing a deal with a regime that is, I just don't think you can do a deal with everybody, Eric. And I know that sounds hawkish or whatever, but I mean, my goodness, it's not going to be worth the paper that it is written on because they are not operating in good faith. And that's the truth.
We do, Curtis, we do have covert operations, do we not?
Oh, there's no doubt.
It will have to be something like that.
You know, and no one's going to say this on television, but, you know, maybe this is the time and the place for a very covert operation.
Or the alternative, take the mothballs out of the Love Shack in Chappaqua, the whitest suburb in America, where Bill and Hillary share a house, and send Bill over there with Al Gore. They've gone there before. They brought back our hostages there before. You see, you play to a nut job like the evil seed of Kim Jong mentally ill, and you make them feel important.
Bringing back
Send
these,
Clinton,
Curtis,
send Gore.
bringing back these 3 hostages isn't going to solve the problem of Kim Jong-un, who consistently tells us he's going to be able to reach the western coast of the United States
Well, that's
with a
Douglas's
bomb.
You know,
point.
if
That's
you
a
were in
different
Seoul,
issue.
Korea right now, it'd be great if we all of a sudden launch missiles into North Korea. But the first people who get hit are in Seoul, and he's going to turn
Let
them
me
into
get Doug in
speed
here for
bumps.
one thing. By no means do I'm not trying to insinuate that we blow the North Koreans to smithereens. I'm saying we take the teeth or set their nuclear program back 10 or 20 years by whatever means necessary.
Yeah, that's the most obvious. You've got to do that at some point. And there's one other thing to bear in mind. They may be a crazy regime, the most crazy, but at some level, Kim Jong-un wants to survive, and he knows, like everyone else in the North Korean leadership, that they're riding a tiger, and the moment that they get off, they get eaten.
Final thought?
I think he said it best.
We're going to leave it right there then. You good?
Yeah.
Good to go. All right, when we come right back, an explosion rocks the heart of Brussels, Belgium, setting Europe on edge yet again. We've got the very latest. Stay tuned.
Out of his clothes. The AP reports the bomb squad has successfully done a controlled explosion of the bomb belt. It's still unclear if the suspects survived. Now, fortunately, officials say there are no civilian casualties and the situation is under control, thank God. But incidentally, this comes after new calls from ISIS for revenge strikes following Sunday's London mosque attack that was carried out by a white British citizen. Douglas, your new book deals all about these problems, so we will start with you. Specifically, I want to ask you this. Many people use the phrase divide and conquer, and it seems that this is an effort by these terror forces to divide the civilians, Muslim, anti-Muslim, and then be able to conquer. Your take?
That's certainly one of the expressed aims of ISIS. They want to go after what they call the grey zone of Muslims who don't support them, who live in Europe, who they think could come onto their side. It's a huge problem, this. I mean, obviously, I'm from London. We've had 3 terror attacks in 10 weeks. And then on Sunday night, when we heard the news, the immediate instinct was, my God, it's another Islamist terrorist attack. But then we discovered it had this awful, dark, extra thing, which was that this is the first really significant terrorist attack by a white British citizen against Muslims just coming out of a mosque.
Doug, can we point to all the terror, with the exception of this one, obviously, the one you're talking about, the white terrorists. I'm talking about the general sense of upscale number, frequency of terror throughout the continent. Can we point to the open border policy of the continent?
Yes, I mean, this is what my book, The Strange Death of Europe, is about. It's about the fact that European leaders, for actually more than a generation, but particularly this generation, have just performed the most insane experiment on our society. They did something, opening the borders, without any consideration of what it meant. And now we're left in this incredibly difficult situation in Europe, that we're trying to find an answer for a problem that the politicians have given us. And they're looking around for answers, but it's not easy because, as I say, they've given us this problem. And they don't want to admit it. And one other thing that's worth pointing out, you know, this guy on Sunday night, there will be everyone from the media and everyone else will be crawling over his contacts. Was he part of a cell? Was he ever involved with something that said, you know, go and kill Muslims? Because if so, we will all come down on all of this like a ton of bricks. But you know what? The Manchester bomber the other week who blew up the Ariana Grande concert and killed 22 people. It turned out that the local mosque was handing out anti-Western literature. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to look into it. We're really good, and rightly so, about looking at it when it's a white extremist doing something. But our societies still are terrible about looking at the causes when it's an Islamist extremist.
Right, and when you say our society, I often talk about the way that things are worse in Europe than in the United States because of policy differences in Europe in terms of just letting everybody in. That's not what we have here right now. I'm not saying we don't need improvements, but that's certainly not what we have in the United States now.
No. No, and that's why, I mean, I just regard all of this as being a big warning for your society. Everything I describe, everything that we have gone through in Europe, you're going through versions of, both what you feel as a society and what you're doing in the world. And I just think this is a huge warning sign for the United States. Don't do what we've done.
To not adopt a similar policy to what Europe has now. I agree with that.
Yeah, Curtis, obviously, we don't want to turn into the disaster that's going on in Europe every day. There's another terror attack there. What lessons should we be taking as we watch our European...
Lesson we should be taking is think back to that time before we went to war in Iraq. We were going to elect Tony Blair president. We said if only Bush 43 could speak like Blair. Blair was the author of the idea. Bring them in and we'll somehow convert them with Western values, with technology, by introducing them to women. Sex, decadence, debauchery. They'll not want to be jihadists anymore. They don't understand the mind of a young man. Give a young man a gun. Give him a weapon. And it's sort of like a phallic symbol. And these fiery imams that they let go into their mosques, and they subsidize these mosques, many of these governments of the European Union. They get up there on the bully pulpit on their day of prayer, Jummah, on Friday, and they talk about violence and killing and doing jihad in Syria and Libya and the Middle East and North Africa and around the world. And the government permits this and subsidizes this. This is like suicide. And Europe, unfortunately, is in this cycle in which they can't seem to bail themselves out.
So I will take your question, what lesson? I think the lesson happened on November 8th of 2016 when we elected Donald Trump president, because we elected someone who had an idea for a more closed border than an open, free society. Let me ask you this, Doug. Is Donald Trump's travel ban, is it a bad idea?
Look, the fascinating thing about that is that when he proposed it, you couldn't find anybody in polite society from where I'm from who would defend it. You could barely find them here. What he suggested was a temporary ban on people from 7 very unstable countries. You know what? There was a poll shortly afterwards that was presented that went around 10 European countries and asked a much harder question. It asked, do you agree with the statement that there should be 0 more Muslims in your country? In 8 out of the 10 European countries, the majority of the public said not 1 more Muslim. One of the only 2 where that wasn't a majority opinion was my country, Great Britain, where only 47% of the public agreed with it.
So are
there's a
we as
huge
Americans
gap.
not listening to Europeans who have changed their opinion?
I think in all of our societies we've got this big problem. There are the things that we know instinctively we need to do to keep ourselves safe, and then there's the political conversation which exists on a different sphere.
Okay, we're going to wrap, but I
already
want to
not
finish
Europe,
with
though.
I want to finish with this point. I appreciate exactly what you said, Douglas. I think that we all need to be very particular when we talk about Muslims, though, right? Not because of we're being PC or delicate or tap dancing around them, but when we collectively talk about them all in a particular way, I think it empowers and emblazons the Islamic State.
Exactly right.
And things happen like what happened.
Yes, exactly. So coming up, though, down to the wire, will tonight's special congressional election in Georgia prove a key test for President Trump's popularity and agenda? Stay with us.
Agenda.
Well, this is the 3rd race we've had to replace Republican House members who left the House to go join the Trump administration. One in Kansas, Republicans won. One in Montana, Republicans won. This one in South Carolina, Republicans are going to win today. So Georgia is the Democrats' last chance to show that they can ride President Trump's unpopularity into office.
Can I weigh in on that? So Byron, you're a very smart guy. But he's wrong about this. This isn't Blockbuster. This isn't Bellwether. This is the 4th. As he aptly points out, South Carolina is going to go to the Republican. It's going to be a strong Republican win tonight. Kansas went to the Republican. Montana went to the Republican. So you have 3 Republican wins, and you're going to say this one where it's like a statistical tie is the one that's going to...
I don't think any of these races tell us anything about Trump and his popularity or the test of his coattails. I think it's really much to do about nothing, quite frankly, and I think that everyone's looking for...
You know what the very, very interesting thing that's happened in Georgia in this race right now? It's not who's going to win or who's going to lose.
How much money?
The fact that $50 million is being spent for a seat that's going to pay the person who occupies that seat $175,000 a year, which tells you, Curtis,
tells you
influence
it
is
tells
worth
you
a lot of money.
Everything about D.C. Whining, dining, pocket lining. That's the national sport for Democrats and Republicans. That's why I'm the chairman of the New York State Reform Party, because there's got to be some kind of campaign financial reform. $50 million, almost 25 on each side. And you really think the outside money knows who Ossoff is? You really think they know who handles it? Do you think they care? What they do is they're betting on Trump and anti-Trump money, and it's all about a horse race. Leave it to the local people to discuss the issues. The money is all about Trump and anti-Trump. Why not take all that money? Because we see commercials. Ossoff, evil. He's the Antichrist. Followed by Handel. Oh, but she's closer to Lucifer. Negative ads over and over. Why not just have wholesale debates, have it for block time on TV so that the local people can actually see the candidates debate the issues as opposed to these 30 and 60-second commercials that are just filled with negativity and teach you nothing about the candidates.
People love negativity.
They do, but I mean, where I'm from, races cost so little money compared to here. I mean, we do look on in amazement. In Britain, it's something like a £15,000 limit in each constituency.
How nice is that?
And I have to say, it just does have advantages. You know, really, like candidates scrabble to get a £500 donation so they can do another leaflet drop. And, you know, there are downsides to it, but the upside is we don't have this thing you have of this sort of pollution about money and politics and the uncertainty about where influence comes from. And just the waste of money.
It's so wasteful. You know, when I hear this number, Eric, of $50 million on this local race, no disrespect to the district, but I have to say, what about how much education that could buy? What about how much health care it could buy? How much infrastructure spending it could buy? I just think of all the better ways that money could be used than to, as my co-host here, wine, dine, and pocket line.
It's becoming like celebrity or sport, where an actor can get $20 million for a movie.
Ridiculous.
Or a baseball player can be paid $30, $35 million.
It's like a franchise
to
tag.
throw
It's a
ball
franchise tag.
once every 5 games.
It's a franchise tag, politically speaking, and it's utterly sickening, actually, to me.
But it does point out what the value of power and influence really is. I mean, to think about that. So this is a 2-year seat, 175 grand a year, but they're spending 50 large to lock down that seat.
I think that'll change with social media, which is something we already saw with Trump's campaign. It's really you don't have to buy a bunch of TV ads to get your message out there. Now you can get your message out there
with
for
a tweet.
Free. And you know, it actually does help if you have your own reality show first. But all right, Karen Handel also made. Sorry, we got to leave it there. We got to leave it there, guys. But tonight, be sure to catch Fox's continuing coverage of the Georgia and South Carolina special elections throughout the evening, including a special edition of Special Report, the latest election results at 11 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss it. Straight ahead, major provocations today in Syria and between the U.S. and Russia. We'll be right back.
Well, welcome back to the Fox News Specialists. Our specialists today are Douglas Murray, author of the book, The Strange Death of Europe, Immigration, Identity, Islam, out today, along with Curtis Sliwa, and we are going to continue the conversation. Tensions escalating yet again between Russia and the U.S. Today, an armed Russian fighter jet erratically flew within 5 feet of a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft over the Baltic Sea. The provocation coming just 1 day after Russia warned that any U.S. plane flying over Syrian government territory would be tracked as a military target. They called it a target. But some are urging calm amid Russia's belligerence.
The Russians are not going to shoot down a U.S. fighter airplane, no matter what we do. They're not going to do that.
Australia, however, is not taking any chances, announcing it is suspending its part in coalition airstrikes against ISIS in Syria after the Russian threat. And if that weren't enough, the U.S. also just shot down an Iranian drone threatening coalition troops in southern Syria. Doug, I'm going to go to you. Now, so there's all these conflicts happening. Here's the 64,000, the elephant in the room, let's call it that. If Syria, Bashar al-Assad is taken out, or if ISIS is finished, that power vacuum leaves some very important territory. Who gets what?
Yeah, it does. And this is a central problem that your country and my country has about Syria. We just don't know what we want, really, from it. The Russians know really clearly what they want. They have always, from the beginning, had an objective to shore up their ally and to do everything they can to basically make the conflict about it being between Bashar al-Assad and ISIS. And it's worked. You know, they've won. And your government's objective in the Obama years and my government's objective during the Cameron years was to replace, to effectively have, we wouldn't do the regime change, but we couldn't see how Bashar al-Assad could be part of the solution. I think we've lost in Syria on that regard. There is no solution you can see to ending civil war that doesn't involve Bashar al-Assad, in my view. And this is a great tragedy and a great loss of power and influence and prestige for your country and for mine.
Well, Curtis, would you agree it's time to moonwalk away from Syria and let the Russians and the Syrians work it out with ISIS?
No, we should follow what President Trump has said. And this one, I agree with him completely. We need to work with the Russians. We're already working with the Iranians. We have Mosul surrounded. We're right next to Shia militias that have Iranian guards with them, teaching them how to launch the invasion side by side as we're teaching the Iraqi special forces how to launch the invasion. We're already working with Iran. And so the president was right. Work with Russia, which means you work with Iran to destroy the #1 enemy to all of us, ISIS. That is the problem. And who is supporting ISIS? The Saudi Arabians, Qatar, Oman, the UAE.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. That's a leap I'm not necessarily willing to take. Go ahead, Ebony.
Eric, let me ask this question. Let me explain it to me, Douglas and Curtis, if you can. When you talk about working with the Russians, we've worked with evil before. I get you, Curtis. But this is what I don't understand. Much of America's interest, when you talk about why people are so gung-ho about getting involved in Syria, comes from the empathy, the compassion. This is a brutal dictator. He's killing his own people, killing babies, washed up on shore. And we know there's a relationship there between Russia and Assad. So help me figure out how to reconcile the joint effort with Russia on ISIS. I get that. But then, obviously, Putin and Assad have an alliance.
Because this whole concept of regime change has failed. Bush 43, Barack Obama. Let's go down the list. Iraq.
You just
failed.
So why are we doing
failed.
Why did you just say we should do it again?
You change yourself,
Yeah, you just kind of said we should do it again.
You just said we should be working with these people to destroy ISIS, to
destroy ISIS.
Yeah,
Okay, but you know what we're already doing
Not
here?
Bashir Assad.
American forces and allies are already not just taking ISIS territory, but we're holding it from the regime. How is that not an invasion?
But did you
How
see,
is this something that
did you
Congress
see that
doesn't even
person
discuss
say
and
the
vote on?
Russians
How?
will not shoot down an American fighter?
Eric
I'm
Bolling?
sure the
Oh, no, that
Russians
was
said
Jim
that about the
Completely
Turks.
irrelevant to what I
Remember,
just
the
said.
Turks shot down a
Completely has
Russian
nothing to do.
fighter.
Nobody's listening to me whatsoever.
Go.
That's okay.
No, go.
I already said something, but I can repeat it again. Just that American forces and allies are not, we're taking the territory from ISIS, but we're also holding it from the regime. How is that not invasion? Right. How do we not need to have Congress vote on that and debate it? And how is that different from an invasion? How are we not already invading Syria? Which for a lot of people who voted for Trump, they were voting against that.
This comes, and I'm agreeing with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly in Syria that it's not our conflict, it's not our fight. But Doug, then you have the people who say, how can you watch Bashar al-Assad kill 400,000 of his own people and stand by and do nothing?
Yeah, but let's be frank about this. The people who say that, and we all have sympathy for that, who wants to see this civil war go on? But the same people who say something must be done today will be the first people to call out when an American plane hits the wrong house and a family die. They'll be the first people to withdraw their support. You know, they urge it on until conflict actually happens. And, you know, I think we have to have a very different view of this. There's a limited capability we have and a limited objective we should have in Syria, which is to take out ISIS. That is the most legitimate aim. But your country and my country no longer clearly have the desire, the will, or the energy to remain as sort of occupying forces. We don't want to do it. We don't want to own it. Russia does. So they just want it more than us.
I want to bring Ebony. Ebony, I'm not sure Doug isn't 100% right. Are we fighting ISIS or are we fighting Bashar al-Assad in Syria? Because they're fighting each other.
They're fighting each other, right. So that's my question, and maybe Douglas just gave me an answer. Maybe as heartbreaking and devastating as what Assad is doing to his people, and we feel like we want to be the world's police and the world's humanitarian effort, perhaps that must be outweighed by the necessary desire to defeat the Islamic State in joint coalition
which
with
was
Russia.
what Assad always wanted.
Okay,
let me ask Kat this. So are we okay, libertarian, I don't know what, kind of pseudo-conservative libertarian, are we okay to say, let's back out, let's let Russia deal with Assad and ISIS in Syria, and then deal with the consequences of a refugee crisis and humanitarian crisis in Syria?
What I'm saying is we're getting to the point where it's an invasion. And we need to have that be debated in Congress and have that conversation.
So you don't necessarily have a problem with attacking or fighting in Syria. You just wanted to go through Congress.
I think it should go through Congress. We should debate it and talk about it the way the Constitution says we're supposed to do, so it's not just one person deciding, because it's too big of a deal. When you talk about Russia threatening us, essentially, you see how big of a deal these things are. There's a reason why it's not just supposed to be one guy and his advisors making these decisions.
I'll tell you
who
doesn't like the idea of a refugee crisis in Syria. The continent of Europe.
Well, yeah, but by the way, that's only one component of our crisis. I mean, people are coming to Europe now from sub-Saharan Africa, from across North Africa, the Far East, the Middle East. You go to the camps in the south of Europe, people are from the entire developed world.
That's why you have a no-fly zone with the Russians and Americans cooperating to keep flights away so refugees can stay in Syria, so when the civil war is over, they're not coming here, they're not going to Europe,
listen,
they're staying in Syria.
I'm not a McCain Republican who says, let's take out Assad. I'm just not that guy. I think this is something that they need to do. We good to go?
Good to go.
Good to go?
Yep.
Let's go then. Up next, Senate Republicans racing to bring their Obamacare repeal and replace law to a vote before the 4th of July recess, but Democrats are deploying every trick in the book they can find to stop